scripts. Right, so it's one thing to make phone calls. It's also another thing to receive phone calls. And the very worst thing you can do, of course, is let that incoming call go to voicemail because you want to see who it is. Ooh. And as I've said, if you're obsessive about saving contact cards, no one's ever phoning you a second time without you knowing who it is. Meaning that when you receive a phone call and it's digits, that's a brand new potential client. Or it's, you know, a scam call. But it's probably a brand new client who's just been referred to you. So you need to answer those phone calls immediately. First ring if you can every single time, and have text shortcuts available to send out saying, I'll give you a call back right away. But one of the biggest mistakes that I see being made regarding application intake for rookies, again guys, rookies, newbies, this is who we're focusing on with this slide in particular, is leaning on an application link. I'm not talking about you, Mr., Mrs., 250 file a year broker. That's not who I'm talking with right now. I'm talking about somebody who has 0 clients. They maybe have 2 pre-approvals in the pipe. They have 40, 50, 60 hours of time in a week. They don't need the efficiency of an application link. They need the experience of an application conversation. This is vital. If you're being trained to pump people over to a link in the first 5 minutes of a call, that's useless. That's not going to help you get where you need to be. It's just not. So how do we fix this? Well, look, to some extent, I think this is a mentor error. And when I put this first bit up, how old is your mentor? I don't mean it in the way some might take it. But how long have they been in the business? And the reason I ask this is what I want you to think about is if your mentor has been in the business for 15 years or more, they didn't have an application link to send out. It's not how they built their business. It's not how they built their database. They built it super duper old school, going to people's homes like aluminum siding salespeople back in the 60s. They built their business actually physically going to people's homes in the 80s and the 90s. That was a common thing. The mortgage broker would show up at the house and physically take the application by paper, take your original documents away with them, because they had to feed them into a fax machine if they were lucky. I mean, there was a period before fax machines as well. But my key point is they didn't build their business, they didn't build their database, they didn't come up firing a link off to people. They were belly to belly, they were face to face. Some of them were telephone only for sure, but they were still having long conversations with those clients. And the reason they have clients today who are referring their kids and their grandkids to them 20, 30 years later is because they built a connection with that client, right? And I'm gonna say, how tired is your mentor? And again, this is not a derogatory or negative statement. To be fair, after a couple thousand pre-approval conversations, we all get a little tired of the pre-approval conversations, and we just kind of want you to fill in all your info and send it to us, because we also can scan an online application that's been filled in. We can scan it pretty quick, and we know whether there's, you know, the makings of an actual funded file there or not. And the other thing to consider is, how big is your mentor's database, right? Like, are they really looking to continually add new business to it, or can they afford to put some of those walls up, like a link, that make it a little more difficult for people to actually jump into the boat with them? They've got a huge database they're working. They've already got all the client's information for the most part. So I think we have to be cautious in the early days with trying to be overly efficient at the expense of being effective. That's the key that I think is the difference here. And again, how different is their world from your own? How did they start out on day one? Using a link? Probably not. Probably using a telephone. And again, ring, ring, right? The greatest hits of the opening questions. What's your best rate? What's the rate today? How much mortgage money do I qualify for? Can I buy this house I'm looking at? Can you beat my bank's rates? What are your fees? These are like the opening kinds of questions that we get that you need some scripts to deal with, right? And you need to build some documents, and you need to practice, and you should record and re-listen to your calls. It's painful. I would not want to listen to my opening phone calls with clients in April of 2008 when I was brand new and didn't know anything, but it would be very useful to be listening to them as they go and practice, practice, practice having these conversations. Now, when I say practice, virtually nobody will. But it is kind of crazy that in this industry, we don't mentor in such a way that we're actually phoning one another and walking through mock application conversations. It's very rare that I run across any brokers who've ever done this with one another. Going back to Rob's earlier comment about an accountability buddy, one of the great things is to role play, right? To play a client-broker conversation through, but most of us are not great actors. And so we struggle with that, and we break character. We can't maintain the character or the role of a client. I mean, for this day, I sort of had a vision of modeling it after Jekyll and Hyde. You know, I thought I'd be like the crazy ranting Mr. Hyde, and Rob would be Dr. Jekyll. Rob would be the calm, cool, collected one. Look at that stone face there. Okay. Rob was going to be Dr. Jekyll. I was going to be Mr. Hyde. But the reality of that is we're not great actors. We just are who we are. So Rob's being Rob and I'm being me, and how that's playing out. Hopefully it's playing out fairly well.
Playing out amazing, don't lie.
We'll see, yeah, we'll see. We'll keep the chat closed right now. But practice, 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 right? And the reality is you will not practice. That is the reality. I get it. You're not going to practice. You need live clients, which again circles back to the whole making the calls to get the live clients. And you know, also you wind up needing a worksheet, which again, we're sharing these worksheets with you. But the practice, it's painful that we will not practice on one another. I mean, imagine if this is how dentists behaved, right? Like you're leaning back in the chair and they're like, wow, you're the first root canal I've ever done. Never even turned this drill on before, but we'll see how it goes. I think I got it figured out here. Hang on, just let me knock you out. Like, no thank you. Right? But for some reason in our industry, we practice on live patients right out of the gates. I don't love that, but it is what we're stuck with.